It is the hot summer of 1846. The U.S. Army is rapidly approaching the city of Monterrey. The troops, under the command of General Zachary Taylor, are highly motivated and ready to deal a decisive blow to the Mexican army. However, General Ampudia has prepared the city's defenses with the aim of repelling the imminent assault by the invaders. The Mexican troops understand that the outcome of this battle will determine the future of their country. In this episode, we will cover the American Army's advance toward Monterrey, Mexico's efforts to prepare the city's defenses, and by the end of this video, we will also review the events of the Mexican-American War in New Mexico and California. Before continuing, please consider liking this video, subscribing, and leaving a comment. In the previous episode, we covered the difficult march of the Army of Occupation from Matamoros to the town of Camargo. We also examined the unstable political situation in Mexico, where in early August 1846, General Paredes' regime collapsed after a coup. General Mariano Salas, an ally of Santa Anna, took the presidency of Mexico on August 5th. A few days later, on August 16th, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna returned to Mexico after convincing U.S. President James Polk that he would negotiate the sale of California and New Mexico to the United States. Finally, we discussed the sanitary challenges faced by the American Army in Camargo, where the climate and disease decimated General Zachary Taylor's troops. In the first half of August 1846, rumors spread quickly among the American soldiers in Camargo. The troops, particularly the volunteers with short-term service agreements, were eager to engage in combat before the war concluded, driven by a desire to seize the opportunity for glory before their service ended. On August 7th, Zachary Taylor arrived in Camargo and tasked Captain Benjamin McCulloch with leading Company A of the Texas Volunteers to scout the two primary routes from Camargo to Monterrey. The eastern route, the most direct, passed through the town of China, located about 70 miles south of Camargo. The second route was longer and went through the towns of Meyer, Cerralvo, and Marine. Taylor wanted the Texans to report which would be the better option for approaching Monterrey. McCulloch's men initially set out from Camargo to explore the eastern route to determine if it was suitable for artillery. The company returned to Camargo on August 9th and reported to Taylor that the eastern route was impractical for artillery due to numerous streams and narrow ravines. A few days later, Taylor ordered the evacuation of the western route to Monterrey, which passed through Meyer and Cerralvo. McCulloch's men entered Cerralvo without resistance, and the mayor peacefully surrendered the town late on the night of August 14th. The group of about 40 Americans camped at a site known as La Ermita, a few kilometers from the town. When the Americans returned to Camargo, they informed Taylor that the route from Meyer to Cerralvo was in suitable condition for the passage of artillery and wagons. They also confirmed rumors that the Mexicans were recruiting militias and fortifying Monterrey at a rapid pace. Finally, Taylor ended the uncertainty in Camargo by announcing that, at the end of August, the army would begin its march toward Monterrey. Taylor decided that Cerralvo, the town that had already surrendered to McCulloch, would be his forward supply depot. The American commander selected only the best troops for the upcoming attack on Monterrey. Taylor would advance with about 6,200 men in total, of whom 3,000 were regular soldiers and 3,200 were volunteers. The less prepared or undisciplined volunteer units were left behind. The volunteer regiments chosen to participate in the advance toward Monterrey were the 1st Ohio Regiment, 1st Kentucky Regiment, 1st Tennessee Regiment, and the Mississippi Riflemen, the latter under the command of Jefferson Davis, the future President of the Confederate States of America. The regular soldiers were organized into two divisions, the first under the command of David Twiggs and the second led by William Worth. Additionally, the 1st and 2nd Texas Mounted Rifle Regiments participated in the American advance, though they would take a different route than the rest of the Army of Occupation. On August 19th, Taylor ordered Worth's 2nd Division to begin advancing towards Cerralvo and establish a supply depot in the city. 2 weeks later, the 1st Division set out. The volunteers departed for Cerralvo a few days later. Zachary Taylor departed for Cerralvo with the 1st Division of Volunteers, while the town of Camargo was left under the care of the 2nd Volunteer Division commanded by General Robert Patterson. The first problem with this march was the lack of transportation means, as there were not enough wagons or mules available, forcing the U.S. Army to buy mules from the local population. This complicated logistics and ultimately impacted the time it took for the troops to move from one point to another. Other problems the Americans faced included the region's hostile terrain and extreme weather. The area was densely covered with chaparral and thorny vegetation with narrow, constricted roads. Adding to all this, the high temperatures caused the soldiers to march slowly and in some cases, suffer from heat exhaustion. Lieutenant Napoleon Tecumseh expressed the difficulties in a letter to his wife.
You can see that we are now on our march towards Cerralvo, and our first day's march has been far from an agreeable one. The brigade took up its line of march yesterday morning at 3 o'clock in order to get through with its day's march before the heat of the day came on. But owing to delays at starting, we did not make 12 miles before 9 o'clock when we arrived here. The day is extremely hot, the sun well up and blazing, and our men suffering a good deal, and many of them are ready to give out.
A few days later, as the Americans neared their objective, the climate began to be less humid and hot due to the change in altitude of the terrain. On August 25th, Worth's division reached Cerralvo and entered the town without incident. Eventually, the 1st Division and the volunteers arrived in Cerralvo, where they found an abundance of fruits and fresh water. After the fall of Matamoros, anticipating Taylor's likely advance, the Mexican government took measures to confront him. In late July, then-President Mariano Paredes sent 3 brigades of regulars from the capital to contain an armed uprising in the city of Guadalajara. These brigades were to head to Monterrey once the revolt was quelled. However, on August 4th, the uprising against Paredes succeeded, and a few days later, these 3 brigades headed north without having reached Guadalajara. At this point in the campaign, General Ampudia, recently appointed as the head of the Army of the North, had 2 options. The first was to take a defensive position north of Saltillo at the Rinconada Pass, a narrow point in the road between Monterrey and Saltillo, giving Ampudia an important geographic advantage. The second option was to defend the city of Monterrey, which could be fortified. Being an urban environment, it would reduce the U.S. Army's artillery advantage. Ampudia, appointed to replace Mejia as the city's commander, was ordered to hasten to Monterrey. He instructed his troops to destroy any baggage that might slow their march. Unfortunately for the Mexican army, desertions were widespread. In addition to the usual reasons for leaving a less than attractive military service, troops were worried about the prospect of engaging in real combat. Moreover, they faced the grim task of crossing the vast deserts of northern Mexico. On August 29th, the 1st Brigade, consisting of about 1,400 infantrymen with 3 8-pound cannons, arrived in Monterrey. The 2nd Brigade arrived on September 6th, and the 3rd only a few days later. Before the arrival of reinforcements, General Mejia, the city's commander, before Ampudia's arrival, had concentrated about 4,000 regulars and auxiliaries. By September 10th, there were 7,303 officers and soldiers in total. The garrison was now large enough to mount an effective defense. The arrival of additional forces greatly boosted the morale of the demoralized Mexican soldiers who had fought in the battles of Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma and had little desire to face the Americans again. Desertions nearly ceased with the arrival of reinforcements. The cavalry had been re-equipped with horses, and this time, it seemed they would perform well. Before Ampudia reached Monterrey, the Mexican government decided to change its strategy and now advised against defending the city against the advancing U.S. forces. Santa Anna had warned against resisting there, and on August 20th, General Ampudia was advised not to engage the enemy unless he was sure that his troops and the fortifications were strong enough to hold out. However, General Mejia opposed this idea, believing it would be dishonorable to abandon Monterrey without a fight. After consulting with his officers, Ampudia decided to defend the city. Finally, the Mexican Department of War accepted Ampudia's decision to stay and fight, as the Mexican general believed he could repel the Americans and possibly push them back beyond the Rio Grande. Ampudia arrived in Monterrey and evaluated the defenses constructed under Mejia's command. The works had progressed slowly due to a lack of resources, but they accelerated when the local population was forced to work without pay. Once Ampudia took charge, Monterrey became a hub of defensive activity, with fortifications being built around the city, particularly in the north and east. Following Santa Anna's instructions, Ampudia implemented a policy to persuade the populations of towns near Monterrey to resist the American invasion. Citizens were encouraged to leave their towns and not sell or provide supplies to the invaders. Additionally, efforts were actively made to intercept messengers and capture small groups of enemy soldiers. Unfortunately, internal divisions continued to plague the Mexican army. General Ampudia was unpopular among his officers. He was accused of having obtained his position through political intrigue and was known for his excessive concern with self-preservation. A few days before the battle began, General Ampudia made a series of poor decisions that highlighted his lack of aptitude for command. Following the advice of General Simeon Ramirez, an infantry officer with no engineering experience, Ampudia agreed to destroy several key fortifications, including those located between the Citadel and the Bishop's Hill, despite the fact that soldiers had worked on them for weeks. Ramirez also suggested demolishing Fort Teneria, a crucial defensive position, and Ampudia accepted this recommendation, which caused a significant drop in morale. With Taylor's army only 40 kilometers away, the timing of these decisions shocked both the troops and senior officers. Ampudia's constant indecision on how to defend the city further reinforced doubts about his leadership as Taylor's army advanced. Adding to all this, limited finances and inconsistency in military strategy worsened the situation. After all the American units arrived in Cerralvo on September 10th, Taylor prepared to move his army toward Marine, located to the southwest, on a 54-kilometer march. He first formed an advance group which included a contingent of pioneers, McCulloch's company, 3 topographical engineers, including George Gordon Meade, and some dragoons, all under the command of Captain Lewis Craig. The advance group departed from Cerralvo on September 12th and worked diligently to make the road passable for artillery, building bridges over ravines and removing rocks. In the following 3 days, the 1st and 2nd Divisions, as well as the volunteers, successively left for Marine. Only the sick, along with a guard of 2 companies from the 1st Mississippi, remained in Cerralvo. On September 17th, after passing through Papagayos, the Americans concentrated near Marine. The next morning, at dawn, the army promptly prepared. As soon as possible, the advance guard set off. The 1st Division followed at 8 o'clock, with the others departing at 1-hour intervals. After spending the night in the town of San Francisco, now known as Apodaca, the Army continued its march at dawn on the 19th. By this time, the Texas Riflemen had rejoined the main body of the Occupation Army. Around 9 in the morning, General Taylor, accompanied by his staff and an escort of mounted Texas Riflemen, descended into the San Juan Valley. Before him lay a rugged landscape of green fields, where cattle grazed peacefully, and in the distance, the city of Monterrey nestled against the mountains, with its white houses and the towers of its cathedral. The serenity of the scene was suddenly interrupted when the city's citadel fired its artillery, sending cannonballs close to Taylor. A portion of the Mexican cavalry approached menacingly, prompting Hayes's regiment to charge toward them. However, Hayes's men were soon called back upon realizing that the Mexican cavalry's movement appeared to be a trap. Despite this, the rest of the American troops, encouraged and confident after previous victories at Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma, advanced enthusiastically as they approached Monterrey. They camped 3 miles or 5 kilometers from Monterrey at Walnut Springs, a beautiful area known for its abundant vegetation and lush walnut trees. In front of them lay the fortified city of Monterrey, defended by a larger Mexican army. The American troops knew that the infantry would bear the brunt of the fighting. Taylor had not brought his heavy artillery to Monterrey, so any battle in the city would be up close and personal. It is unclear why Taylor left his siege guns in command. The 2 18-pound cannons could have taken down the city's defenses from a distance. Perhaps he believed that the heavy guns, which were difficult to move, would slow his advance and prevent him from reaching Monterrey before it was too fortified. He might also have doubted that they could be safely transported over the rough road to his objective. Meanwhile, even as Taylor's army camped just a few kilometers from Monterrey, Ampudia continued to make changes to his plan. His best engineer, Don Luis Robles, a military professional, recommended rebuilding Fort Teneria, a suggestion he likely made since Ampudia had ordered its demolition. This time, however, Ampudia accepted the advice. The soldiers were surprised, having wasted valuable days destroying the fort, only to now be ordered to rebuild it. Robles was placed in charge of the reconstruction. Orders were given to dig the trench, establish platforms for the cannons, and reinforce the fort walls. At dawn the next day, the Mexicans continued working. From the parapets of Teneria, they likely could see Taylor's men setting up their camp in Santo Domingo. The date was September 20th, 1846, a day of special significance to the people of Monterrey, as it marked the 250th anniversary of the city's founding. General Ampudia ordered the final preparations, positioning his troops, guns, and cavalry throughout the city, and established his headquarters in the sacristy of the cathedral, where he also stored 17,000 pounds of gunpowder and ammunition. He then climbed to the top of the cathedral to observe the movements of the American army. At that moment, the crucial Battle of Monterrey was about to begin. Taylor's campaign was just one of many actions the Americans took to conquer Mexican territories. In this segment, we will briefly cover the actions in New Mexico and Alta California at the beginning of the Mexican-American War. These campaigns will be covered in detail in future episodes. In June 1846, after the declaration of war on May 13th, U.S. Army General Stephen Kearny moved southwest from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, with the so-called Army of the West, consisting of approximately 1,700 men. Kearny's orders were to secure the territories of New Mexico and Alta California. In Santa Fe, the Mexican governor, Manuel Armijo, wanted to avoid confronting the Americans. However, on August 9th, Colonel Diego Archuleta, along with militia officers Manuel Chavez and Miguel Pino, forced him to prepare defenses. The Mexicans established a position at Apache Canyon, a narrow pass about 10 miles southeast of the city. On August 14th, before the American army was even in sight, Armijo changed his mind and decided not to fight. When Pino, Chavez, and some of the militia insisted on resistance, Armijo ordered the artillerymen to aim their cannons at the militiamen, with the intention of dispersing them. Ultimately, the new Mexican army disbanded, and Armijo fled to Chihuahua. Kearny and his troops encountered no Mexican forces when they entered Santa Fe on August 15th. Kearny claimed the territory of New Mexico for the United States without firing a single shot. On August 18, 1846, Kearny declared himself military governor of the territory and established a civil government in the conquered land. Meanwhile, in California, Commodore John Drake Sloat, commander of the Pacific Squadron, upon learning of the outbreak of hostilities between Mexico and the United States, ordered the forces under his command to occupy Alta California. Most of Sloat's ships were in the port of Monterrey. American troops captured what was then the capital of Alta California on July 7, 1846, without firing a shot. That same day, Sloat issued an unprecedented proclamation announcing that California was now part of the United States, long before negotiations to end the war had even begun. The port of Monterrey should not be confused with the city of Monterrey, which we have discussed in this episode. 2 days later, on July 9, troops from the USS Portsmouth, which had been anchored in Sausalito, captured the town of Yerba Buena, today known as San Francisco. On July 15th, Sloat transferred his command to Commodore Robert F. Stockton, a much more aggressive leader, who continued the American offensive. U.S. Marines, sailors, and militias quickly took control of the cities and ports of Northern California. Within days, they had seized Monterrey, San Francisco, Sonoma, Fort Sutter, and other small towns, almost all with little to no resistance. In Southern California, the commander of the Mexican forces, General Jose Castro, and the governor of Alta California, Pio Pico, fled from the town of Los Angeles before the arrival of U.S. forces. On August 13, 1846, when Stockton's forces entered Los Angeles, the conquest of Alta California seemed complete. This concludes our video. In our next episode, we will continue with the narration of the Battle of Monterrey. If you found the content of this episode engaging, consider giving it a like. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated on our future content.